Still with me is the former national security advisor to President Trump, John Bolton. He's a former United States ambassador to the United Nations under President George Bush. He is Ambassador Bolton is not one to be shy when it comes to his views on foreign policy. Ambassador, thanks for sticking with us. Let's talk a little bit about the war in Ukraine, how you think it's going, the American role in it. We've put $20 billion into it so far and are now considering giving Ukraine Patriot missiles, which really tilts the military field against Russia so far as it's not already tilted. Is that your opinion?
Well, I think we have to start back in February, where the U.S. and the West as a whole failed to deter the invasion to begin with. And I think there are a lot of lessons learned we should go back to there at an appropriate time. In any event, post that failure, yes, we've given Ukraine considerable assistance. I think most importantly of all, intelligence assistance that they've used very effectively. I think, unfortunately, in too many cases, the aid has been a day late and a dollar short. I'd certainly favor giving them Patriot missiles, and I would do more to assist them, too, because I think this act of unprovoked aggression by the Russians needs to be countered, not simply to defend Ukraine, but for the signal it sends around the world, particularly to Beijing.
This used to be a non-starter for Republicans, or non-starter. I mean, it was the main starter for Republicans, Russian aggression. Are you at all concerned that Kevin McCarthy and a few Republicans coming into Congress have said that we shouldn't be doing as much as we're doing, and probably we should be doing less, that we're not focusing on domestic affairs because so much energy and money is going to Russia, to Ukraine to fight Russia?
Well, I think there is a virus of isolationism within the party. I think it's a very small minority, and I think it's a total non sequitur to say we shouldn't be concerned about what's happening in Ukraine because the Biden administration is not doing things right in some other area. There are many problems to correct in Washington today, and they should be corrected. That doesn't diminish the importance of what we're doing in Ukraine. And I think part of the problem here is that many of the isolationists, including the isolationists on the left of the Democratic Party, think that what the assistance we're providing to Ukraine is some kind of charity, that we're taking it away from America. That's not the case. I view this as something in America's direct national security interest, and I think if people understood that, there'd be even more support for helping the Ukrainians than there is already, which remains overwhelming. I think we've had a failure of political leadership, again, in both parties for a sustained period of time, who have not treated the American public like adults, who have not addressed the problems we faced and said what we need to do to defend against it. I think the Americans are owed that explanation, but I think, as we have shown historically, given the facts, given the realities, we will do what's necessary to protect our interests.
However, Joe Biden may go down as the president who brought America's, at least a traditional greatest adversary, to its knees. Donald Trump keeps on talking about other things he would have done, but Donald Trump was pretty chummy with Russia.
Look, if Donald Trump were still president, the Russians would be in Kiev already. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And actually, just for the historical record, the American president who brought the Soviet Union to its knees was Ronald Reagan.
I sort of saw that coming from you.
Glad to do it.
Let me ask you about Iran. You definitely didn't like that Iran nuclear deal, but in fact, it was working. It was a very narrow deal. It was meant for something very, very specific, and it was to control Iran's nuclear weaponry aspirations. Do you worry now that we have no leverage over Iran because we pulled out of that deal, and now Iran's being able to nuclearize itself and help Russia in this war?
Well, I think you've got that completely backwards. The deal was fundamentally flawed. And let me address a point I heard you raise in the introduction. The deal permitted Iran to enrich uranium to get a concentration of the U-235 isotope at reactor-grade levels, between 3 and 5%. That didn't permit them to go to weapons-grade enrichment levels, which are 90%. Now, that sounds like two numbers that are very far apart. They are not. When you allow enrichment of uranium to reactor-grade levels of U-235, you are permitting the amount of work equivalent to 70% 70%, 70% of what it takes to get to 90% levels of U-235. That's why when the United States leases nuclear technology for civil nuclear reactors, it typically requires licensee countries to agree not to enrich uranium and not to reprocess plutonium. In fact, our friends in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others say, you won't allow us to enrich uranium, but you've allowed the Iranians. That's why the Iranians took the deal. That's why it was a mistake in 2015. It hasn't gotten any better with age.
But just to be clear, if in that deal the U.S. would have had potentially some leverage, hopefully some leverage with Iran, which we do not have now. Iran has a more hardline government than it did when that deal was made in 2015. You'd agree with that, right? They're more hardline than they were then.
No, I don't.
You don't agree with that?
I don't agree with that at all.
You don't think that the Raisi government is more hardline than the one we had?
You want to let me answer the question? Thank you very much.
I'm just asking if that's you don't believe that to be true.
Let me answer the question. Just stop talking, and I'll answer the question. There is no evidence whatever for the thank you. There is no evidence whatever for the last 25 years there's been any division at the top of the Iranian government on their determination to achieve deliverable nuclear weapons. Whatever their disagreements on theological matters or other things, the determination, the strategic decision to get nuclear weapons never wavered. We lost leverage when we signed the 2015 deal by unfreezing perhaps up to $150 billion of frozen Iranian assets and by releasing the sanctions. That's when they were free then not only to continue to engage in their nuclear weapons program, but to engage in a dramatic increase in terrorism around the Middle East. This regime is a threat in multiple ways, and suffering under the illusion that we had helped resolve the nuclear problem, which we had not, we actually freed the Iranian government up to engage in more mischief in the Middle East and around the world.
If I may, I just want to get clarity on this point. Engaging in mischief was not part of the deal. Not purifying uranium was part of the deal. And you will agree that until we pulled out of the deal, that part was being adhered to by Iran.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't.
How are you disagreeing with the 3.67%?
It certainly was not. Because there were indications that Iran was violating parts of the deal dealing with weaponization. And my point to you is, which I guess I didn't make clearly enough, the 3.67% limit was a mistake. It was effectively no limit at all, and that's why the Iranians knew it. If you go back to the early 2000s, when Tony Blair and the Europeans first started negotiating with Iran, their bottom line in 2002, 2003 was that Iran would not be permitted any enrichment at all. And when it became clear in the negotiations before 2015 that Iran wouldn't agree to a deal unless we gave in on that, the Obama administration gave in. It was a stupendous mistake, and we're still paying the consequences for it.
All right, if you run for president, you become president. Taiwan, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, might become your problem. Every single day, there are ships and planes that cross the median line of the Taiwan Strait, and it looks like a test. Every single day, it looks like a test. Joe Biden has said some things that sometimes stand outside of official U.S. policy, implying that if China goes into Taiwan, America will stand with Taiwan. Do you agree with that policy?
Well, you know, one would think the president actually sets U.S. policy, but maybe that's not true in the Biden administration. I think the defense of Taiwan is a vital American national interest. Again, I would say the best way to accomplish that is to create structures that deter the Chinese from attacking or from creating a pretext to try and take control of Taiwan. I think we're way behind in that. I think time may be short, and I think there's a lot we need to do to help prevent the attack from taking place in the first instance. But I think we're going to have a lot of support in the region from Japan, I think from South Korea, Australia, Singapore. The whole Indo-Pacific is very worried about China, as we should be. So time may be short, but I think we can still do what we need to do.
You also, when we were talking about Iran, you mentioned our friends in the Middle East, and you mentioned Saudi Arabia. Would you continue the relationship that the United States has with Saudi Arabia if you were the president?
Of course. And I think any argument to the contrary is badly mistaken. I was once in Moscow meeting with Putin shortly after the Khashoggi murder became public, and Putin put it right on the line. He said, you know, I hear people in the United States want to cut off the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Go ahead. I'll be happy to sell them weapons.
All right. John Bolton, thanks for joining us this morning. Good to talk to you. John Bolton is a former national security advisor. He's a former United States ambassador to the United Nations, and he's the author of Room Where It Happened and Surrender is Not an Option, Defending America at the UN and Abroad.